So this conversation tonight really gives me hope because a group of people have shown up to get outside of themselves and think about the entire ecosystem. ALFers always show up ready to play, ready to get down to dialogue. So thank you for being here. I also want to thank our sponsor for this series, the Heising-Simons Foundation. So excited that they came on as a sponsor. We have a couple other exciting events coming up that they've chosen to support, including what will surely be a groundbreaking dialogue in the fall with Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project. Tonight's festivities, as well as some other events we have coming up. Certainly welcome others that are interested in supporting the speaker series and helping to contribute to us bringing more of this kind of content. Before we begin, of course, I want to start with a land acknowledgement as a way to recognize our interconnectedness and responsibilities across history and in our multicultural community today. Across Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, we are on the land of the Ohlone. Others joining from across the US are on other tribal lands, and I see some of those listed, I think, in our chat here. We thank the past, present, and future generations of these tribes. And as we gather for the purpose of leadership for the common good, let us remember that to create a truly inclusive community and democracy, we must work to unpack our history of colonialism and dismantle current systems of injustice that all people in our communities, so that all people in our communities can thrive. So thank you. Thank you for being here. And with that, I want to introduce ALF Senior Fellow from Education Class 27, Darcie Green, CEO of Latinas Contra Cancer and co-leader of ALF affinity groups La Comunidad and Justice and Public Safety. Take it away, Darcie.
Thank you so much, Dan. I am also very excited for this conversation today. Today, we're joining as ALF Senior Fellows, and partners to explore what we can do about environmental justice and to address climate change. We're going to explore the connection between environmental sustainability and racial and economic equity. We're going to learn how we can lead for a just transition from an extractive economy to a generative approach for the well-being of people and our planet. Just a little bit about the program flow. We're going to hear from Mateo Nube, his keynote. We're going to have a panel discussion. We'll have a dialogue and breakouts, and then we're going to reconvene as a group to hear insights and final remarks from Mateo. We will be recording this main session, and please remember to keep yourself on mute and feel free to use the chat. With that, I am honored to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Mateo Nube, co-founder and co-director of Movement Generation and national co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance.
Thank you so much, Darcie. I'm incredibly humbled and honored to be with you all today in dialogue and generative conversation. Once again, I'm Mateo. I'm saying hello to you from unceded Ohlone land, specifically Cowichan territory. I'm in South Berkeley, so I guess Upper Bay for some of you who are saying hello from the South Bay. And I deeply appreciate being in a community of curiosity, digging into important lines of inquiry with you all. And specifically, I'm very honored to contemplate what it means to be alive at this particular moment in the clock of the world, as the beloved and luminary civil rights leader Grace Lee Boggs out of Detroit called upon us to do before she passed some years ago. As Darcie said, I will share with you what has born to be or proven to be an incredibly fruitful framework for many of the organizations that are part of the Climate Justice Alliance on a national level, which we call the Just Transition Framework. At first glance, breathing in the fires that rage all around us these days, these times read like apocalyptic times. And I lead with this because etymology is valuable. And if we look at the etymology of the word apocalypse or apocalypto, the suffix calypto literally means to cover or hide. And the prefix apo means away, as in apocalypto is to take the cover away, to lift the veil. So that's, I think, an important invitation for us to embrace this lifting of the veil, because many of the reasons of how we've gotten where we are today, historically, are about veils. Contradicting or conflicting what perhaps our gut is telling us is happening. And engaging with the scale and pace of the ecological crisis we're living through takes psychological courage. It takes our capacity to both hold grief and trauma and deploy hope and proactivity simultaneously. So I thank you in advance for deploying that courage on a daily basis, because we need it more than ever. And I'd argue that our role as folks who happen to be alive at this epic moment in history, our role is not to shrink. Some within the mainstream environmental movement in the US say, talk about a smaller footprint or having less of an impact. And I'd say we missed the opportunity for that easy way out a long time ago. Our task now is actually to deploy 100 years of greater impact, but towards a completely different purpose and in humble cooperation with the living world. No other species can actually do it faster or more effectively than us. And what I mean by doing it is capping oil wells, tearing out concrete, and regenerating soil to grow healthy food, and so on. We have these creative minds and opposable thumbs that are the anchor points of what we call work, our human labor. And this combination of particular talents is what our species brings. And it allows us to generate immense beauty and creativity in the world when applied freely and non-coercively. So embarking on and committing to a just transition demands, amongst other things, unabashed honesty as we collectively navigate these troubled waters. So I'm using this term, just transition. And I'd say a just transition is about liberating our spirits from the cognitive concrete that has paved over our imaginations. It's liberating ourselves from the drone voice that says there is no alternative to the extractive economy. When I say extractive economy, what I mean by that, it's a system that's rooted in resource-intensive industrial production, which is completely outstripping the regenerative capacity of our ecosystems. I mean, I think we all learned about it in kindergarten, or rather, it was mentioned in one way or the other, and it was completely coherent and intuitive to us, which is you can't take more than you put in. And yet we are living under a system that is doing that continually. And that is a key lesson in this key moment of history. I'll say it another way, every step we take towards the further concentration of land, water, and capital into the hands of a few is a further step towards eco-apartheid. Why do I say that? Because an extractive economy, its logic, will look at a forest and won't see a forest. It sees lumber. It looks at a community of people and it doesn't see people. It says labor, all waiting to be exploited towards profit. Or another way of saying it is like, what is at the heart of an extractive economy? It is speculation. And if we look at the etymology, to speculate is to craft ideas and make choices without evidence. So instead, I'd say we need evidence-based economies. We need regenerative economies. We need to return to a right relationship with place and with each other. We need to return to a right management of home. And our solutions agenda to get there must restore and repair historic harms, because they are interlinked with how this is playing out today. We need a reparations agenda. Reparations is such a poetic word because it literally, if you stretch it out, it means to repair our relations. So solutions that are rooted in deep democracy, accountability, that are rooted in accountability not only to each other, but to the Earth's living systems is key to our path forth. It's interesting because I've been in spaces where when we hold a conversation like the one we're holding today, and I share some of the thoughts that I'm sharing, folks say, well, you need to be politically realistic. And it's a very curious statement, because I'd say that folks that are committed to a growth paradigm, I mean, if we just think about it, if we're committing to an economy that's going to grow at 7% each year, that's exponential in nature. And we live on one planet, right? We don't live on 5. I'd say that argument is rooted in illusion, and that the argument that we should live within the bounds of how life on planet Earth operates is realistic. I think y'all understand what I'm saying. It's part of this concept of lifting of the veil. So that said, maybe I'm posing a first. I've probably posed more than one contradiction. I'm posing. I'm inviting you to step into a contradiction. Like, what is the realistic position as we think about the conundrums we're facing planetarily? So what I want to do, I've shared a set of concepts. I want to present some slides to you all. So I'm going to share screen and then start a PowerPoint. Please let me know if you don't see it. I will assume we're good if I don't hear anything. So I already, what time is it in the clock of the world? So we've become a force of nature. I think we all know that, where we've altered the life support systems of the planet. Like those systems are shifting radically and rapidly. And instability has become the new normal. Superstorms and so forth are the norm now. So the question really is really straightforward. If change is the new status quo, are we moving towards an intentional and elegant transition where we're equitable in how we design it, or are we moving towards collapse? So you've heard me use a set of words, and I want to unpack them because I think they're very useful. And it's also, I think, a platform through which we can talk about this with anybody and make sense of the world, because as humans, we're story-based animals. We tell story and we use words to make meaning of what's alive. And I've been talking about the management of home for a reason, because if we look at the etymology of words like economy or ecology, eco comes from, I think it's phonetically pronounced as oikos, or it's spelled as oikos in Greek, and it literally means home. And if we take that as a starting point, if we think about, okay, we all live within ecosystems, it's useful to realize, I was like, oh, right, we live in a situation that is based on relationships. In many ways, you can argue there's no such thing as an individual. Without others, without interconnection, we are actually nothing. And so an ecosystem is a system of microorganisms, plants, animals, soil, air, and it's not a catalog, right? It's a complex of relationships. So why do I say that? Because if we then look at the word ecology, logic comes from logic. It's the knowledge of home. And knowing home and understanding and reading home is the key to taking good care of home. I would argue, I grew up in a city. I would argue that I went through an educational system that for the first 20 years of my life made me functionally illiterate about home. And I'd say it was by design. I learned nothing about the watershed I live in. I learned nothing about the food shed I live in. I learned nothing about the energy shed that met the needs of the human settlement I grew up in. And I suspect that that's the case for most of you. And if so, then I would say the notion of reclaiming knowledge of home is a deeply political notion. It's a right that all humans need to assert in order to take care of home well. So if we go with that, then this is arguably the most powerful word of this cluster of eco words, which is economy, right? So as it happens, the suffix means management, and it's so powerful to appreciate. Like, oh wow, economy means management of home. It's how we organize these relationships, ideally to take care of place and each other. But the point here is that there isn't the economy, even though that article is often attached to it when we hear about it in the news. There are actually many ways of managing home. It can be good or it can be bad, but just appreciating that there's a plural possibility already, I think, frees our creativity. So obviously, economy, management of home, can be about turning land, life, labor into the property for a few. Or economy can be about returning land, life, and labor into a balanced web of stable relationships. Why am I saying this? Because words like GDP, financial markets, stocks, they don't mean economy. They are simply indicators of a particular way of managing home. There are actually many ways to measure how we, are managing home. You can measure how healthy the soil is, or how healthy are the waterways, or how healthy are the people in that ecosystem, how healthy are the animals. Obviously, all economic activity has ecological consequences. But the point again here is that there are many ways to manage home. And I think we all know we are living under a situation where we've globalized management of home. So therefore, we've globalized our ecosystem, right? I can go to a grocery store and I will get garlic that was grown in China, even though, assuming that most of us live in the Bay, we live so close to Gilroy, the theoretical garlic capital of the world, right? So, but yet China is part of our food chain. You get the point, right? It's complicated and yet it's simple at the same time. So that all said, we often at Movement Generation, which is my home organization, talk about ecological, the applied knowledge of home and its relationship to justice. So Dr. Cornel West calls justice what love looks like in public. And we define ecological justice as a state of balance between human communities and healthy ecosystems, predicated or built off of mutually beneficial relationships and participatory self-governance. So I would argue that what we must move towards is ecological justice. So when I talk about economy, or when we talk about economy, we found it actually really useful to talk about, since I said there's actually economies, to talk about or understand or wrap our heads around economies based off of 5 pillars, as in any economy is built on 5 pillars. One is, they're often called resources, but maybe it makes more sense to call them life sources. It's like we need stuff to build human settlement, right? If we're going to build schools or feed ourselves or create transportation systems. So that's one element. I already talked about work. That's the gift we bring to actually create things out of these life sources. They're all deployed towards a particular purpose. That's the 3rd pillar. And then there's a cultural worldview that gets us all to agree, oh yeah, this purpose makes sense. And then there's a governance structure that enforces that purpose. So that's useful. And I apologize, I'm going to go a little fast, but I think this makes sense. So in an extractive economy, in very simple terms, you can say that the purpose of an extractive economy is to enclose wealth and power. And here it's very important to distinguish, an economy isn't about what the folks who run it say it's about what it actually does. How it manifests, especially if it's manifesting that over and over, is actually its purpose. So it's really important to distinguish between rhetoric and what is actually happening. And I think we are all aware that the way we source most everything in the globalized economy is through extraction. And most of the labor is deployed in a not very consensual way. I would argue that most folks are at jobs they're like, this is not what I would want to be doing, but I need to be doing because I need this paycheck to meet my family's needs, right? And for some folks, it's more dire than that. And then I would argue that most of our current systems of governance are actually based on militarism and violence. And I'll give an example. When the US invaded Iraq 20 years ago, the argument was basically, hey, folks in Iraq, that oil under your ground, it belongs to us. And people in Iraq were like, wait a second, what are you talking about? Some of us don't agree. We're like, what you say doesn't matter. We're still coming in and deploying. And we're seeing a similar manifestation of that in Ukraine right now. And, we could unpack that in many places. And there are a range of arguments that have become common sense, even if they're not good sense in our current context, that enforces extractive economy. We're bombarded with messages that say we're consumers in this society versus we are co-creators and agents in this society. So then the question, I was like, okay, if we're moving towards regenerative economies, what are, or in places where regenerative economy do exist, how are these pillars organized? And I would argue that the culture and worldview is rooted in sacredness and caring. It's rooted in the conception that it is immoral for there to be sacrifice zones. that it is incompatible with our spiritual selves to say that any particular groups of people or any living beings are disposable. And then the purpose is rooted on our continual exploration of what ecological and social well-being looks like. And the way we harvest towards human settlement is built on regeneration. I'm guessing we're all familiar with the concept of zero waste. And it's a concept on which life on planet Earth for billions of years has been built on. It is how life works. So it behooves us as humans to stay rooted in that conception. And work is deployed cooperatively. And I want to pause here because if we think about how we got into this situation we got, where climate change is but a symptom. It's not the root cause, it's a symptom of a set of dynamics that have led to tremendous amounts of carbon being in the atmosphere. I think it's really important to say that we don't get here without the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution does not happen without the transatlantic slave trade and the theft of indigenous land. The infrastructure that was built, starting in the 1700s in particular, was built on forced labor and on stolen land. And if we think about it deeply from a moral and ethical standpoint, I think we would all agree that pretty much everybody who was deployed, whether it be in those cotton fields or in the gins or what have you, would not have consented, did not consent, and would not have chosen to do that kind of work on their own accord. They would have most probably, because that's what most of us do most of the time, built something way more generative and caring and thoughtful in close coordination with the community in which they were invested in. That's what cooperation means in a regenerative economy, where we actually deploy with full consent and with full care for each other. And governance obviously then is rooted in the concept of collective self-determination, from our state houses to our schools to our homes. I know I just shared a lot, and I'm going to look at the time. Darcie, would you say I have about 5 minutes left? Does that feel fair?
That feels fair, yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So then the question becomes, again, I asked it before, what will change look like? How do we get from here to there? How does the shift from an extractive economy that's global nature move into thousands of regenerative economies in, I would say, bioregions across the planet in a coordinated way? That is the question, I think, upon all of us. What is the consensual way to both stop the bad and build the new? And that is what we mean within the Climate Justice Alliance, for example, when we say just transition, because transition is inevitable at this point, but justice is not. So if we acknowledge that change is the new status quo, and if we look at, for example, the heat waves that happen across the Pacific Northwest the last summer, there are so many indicators that show us that whether it's, again, heat waves or superstorms or many other shifts that are happening, while they're universal and that we're all feeling them, some of us experience the impact in much deeper and crueler ways than others. Folks in Black and brown communities, in poorer communities, have way less trees, to name but one element that makes neighborhoods hotter than other neighborhoods, right? So we often talk about shocks, slides, and shifts. So if we're in an era of shocks occurring more and more, this is an image of Hurricane Maria, and shocks being acute moments of disruption, right? But shocks are also the fact that on a daily basis, it breaks my heart to look at this image. These pictures are 5-7 years old, and we could substitute them with many others. That whether it's superstorms or police brutality, there are acute moments of disruption impacting our communities on a regular basis. But there are also slides, right? Sea level rise is a slide. The the degradation of the soil upon which California agriculture depends is a slide. These may not be experienced as shocks, but once set in motion, they can be incredibly hard to stop, right? Drought, we all know, is the slide. It may not be acute, but can be catastrophic. Why am I sharing all this? There are shocks, there are slides, and sometimes there's shocks and slides. We have drought, and then we have wildfires, and then we get so-called solutions to these wildfires. These days, about 20-30% of the firefighters in California who are fighting wildfires are prison labor. Why do I bring this up? Because shocks and slides can be harnessed towards false solutions. There are prison firefighters because there are folks with the capacity to make policy decisions saying that's what should happen. So we've taken people who've been imprisoned, who have been in many ways disconnected from opportunity in a current economic system, and then their way of breathing fresh air, except it's not fresh at all, for a day or 3 or 10, is to be deployed as firefighters, right? So I'm saying all this because our responsibility is to, if we're going to lift the veil, to acknowledge that we're in an era of shocks and slides, and we need to build shifts that actually bring us into an elegant and equitable way of caring for each other. The movement for Black Lives is an expression of folks responding to a set of shocks and moving towards shifts that we truly seek. I would argue that the movement for Black Lives is a key front of ecological justice in motion in the United States, for the reasons that I hope are becoming evident based on what I said earlier. I don't even need to describe this. You all remember this probably. This is Trump in Puerto Rico. Are we going to drive kind of this monster truck over the ravine? Or will we actually lean into reparations, repairing our relationships? This is a delegation. Climate Justice Alliance sent many farmers that were continent-based to Puerto Rico to help folks in agroecological projects in Puerto Rico rebuild infrastructure right after Hurricane Maria. I'll end by saying transition is a process of navigating contradictions. So we're in conversation because we have no choice. If we're going to be courageous with each other, we must name the contradictions, we must own them together, and we must elegantly co-design in a way that, again, we ensure that nobody is disposable. And I would argue that to get there, frontline communities who've been in harm's way historically need to be the leaders and the designers of the solutions going forth. Otherwise, we most certainly will repeat many of the mistakes that got us here. Or I was going to tell you a story, but I ran out of time. Maybe we'll get to it later. But I think this image says it all. Be realistic, demand the possible. It's about sharing and caring instead of banks and tanks. So thank you, Darcie, for letting me go. Maybe a minute or two over, but I'll stop my share and I'll take a deep breath and look forward to being in dialogue with you all.
Mateo, thank you so much. I mean, we clearly could have had so much more time with you, and I know that there's so much more to share. I appreciate you sharing your slides and invite you to stay for the panel and to participate in that. I want to let everyone know we welcome your reflections and your comments in the chat. Again, Mateo, thank you so much for that incredible presentation and laying that really important groundwork for this conversation we're going to have now. I'd like to welcome and invite to the panel Kalra, California State Assemblymember and ALF Fellow, class of 27. Please correct me if I'm getting the Roman numerals incorrect. And also Dave McQuarrie, Senior VP and General Manager, Personal Systems category at HP, and class of 41. Fantastic. Thank you both so much for making the time to have a conversation today. So we'll go ahead and start with this first question. How do Mateo's ideas about a just transition relate to your work for sustainability?
First of all, thank you, Darcie, for moderating this conversation. And Mateo struck a lot of chords with me, certainly in the work that I've been trying to achieve and work on in the state legislature. I think the alarm hasn't just been rung, it's been ringing for so many years. I've had the privilege of being able to go to the Amazon in Brazil and to go to Ecuador and other locations where the land is just being ravaged for our consumption. And I think in terms of the legislature, I mean, the reality is that, as Mateo referred to, the politics get so much in the way of what is kind of the common sense of what we need to do. We see the scientists tell us, the indigenous communities tell us, our neighbors tell us that are in toxic environments, children getting sick. We have the worst air quality in the nation here in California in the Central Valley. There are so many indicators and we have enough data, enough information, both morally and intellectually, to know that it's already past time for action, and yet we don't take that action. And so it's incredibly frustrating. It definitely informs me of much of what Mateo spoke to are the kinds of things that really move me to act. However, as many see, certainly nationally, but even here in California, as progressive as we are, or as progressive as we like to present ourselves, the reality is that we're moving far too slow, if at all, and in some cases moving backwards. And so I appreciate the opportunity to have dialogue, because the reality is that everyone has to be on board for us to really combat the damage that we've already done and are going to continue to do if we don't take this as seriously as it deserves.
Thank you. Dave, some question. How is this idea of, and the concept of a just transition relating to your work for sustainability?
Thank you, Darcie. Well, personally, it's Mateo and I had the chance to meet, as you know, and I'm moved and inspired by his words for the company, for HP. Our objective is to become the most just and sustainable technology company in the world. So for us, there is a very tight alignment around the goals and the aspirations and the ambitions and the methods that Mateo talks about. Now, we've been at this for a long time. Our company's 83 years old, and we've been at this for a few decades. We have a long way to go, but it is not just something that we care about because we ought to care about it. We care about it because it's an imperative for any company. And Mateo made that point quite clearly, both before when we spoke and again today, that we're all citizens of the economy, the way he described it. And I really like the way he described it. And the bigger the footprint, the bigger the responsibility. And we take that very seriously. So very strong alignment. We can get into a lot of what we're doing. We have what we consider to be ambitious goals. I'm sure that we could be accused of them not being ambitious enough, but we feel they are, at least, and we're getting after them.
Dave, can you tell us a little bit about those goals? What are the most exciting aspects of the work? What's the most promising? And also tell us a little bit about what the challenges are.
Yeah, I mean, we have a number of goals with three kind of milestone points: 2025, 2030, and 2040. Starting the furthest out, 2040, we aspire. We have committed actually to being net zero greenhouse gas across the whole value chain. By 2030, we want to get 50% of the way there, and a ton of other initiatives. This is just on climate. We have a three-pronged strategy, if you like. So climate is one, digital equity is the second, and human rights is the third. We have goals within all of them. The most pressing, of course, for the planet are climate, but we think the other two warrant an awful lot of attention. And again, we have scale. Most exciting for us is that we have impact. We have the opportunity to influence. I mean, many years ago, I'll give you a quick example. Many years ago, our chief legal counsel, who is herself an alumni of ALF, went to all of the partners with whom we work across the world and said, if you don't have a certain diversity footprint, we won't buy from you. We won't deal with you. We won't partner with you. So we're applying the scale of our organization outside of our organization. And Kim Rivera, some of you all know her, was an inspiration in that. And a lot of other parts of our company have gone down that same road. So we have good commitment, CEO down to the individuals in the company and everywhere in between. We have scale. And the last thing I'd just say, most promising, we just announced the acquisition of a company called Choose Packaging. If you're not familiar with it, they are the first company in the world to produce a non-plastic water bottle. And while that might not sound particularly meaningful, the number of water bottles that are disposed of, let's say, inappropriately or in a non-sustainable way is so dramatic and is so impactful to the planet that this, for us, is a good example of how we can apply technology and some of our scale and have a meaningful impact on big problems that the world faces. So there's a lot there, but I feel like the scale of our company and the depth of our commitment gives us an opportunity to make a real difference.
I've heard Mateo speak in the past about stopping immediate harm while keeping an eye toward building a different future. Assemblymember, what's your ideal endgame? What kind of policy changes will help stop this immediate harm that we heard about from Mateo's keynote, and while helping us build a different future?
Yeah, that's a great question. As far as an ideal end game, I don't think there really can be one when it comes to creating a sustainable planet and community. But I do think that there are immediate goals that we must focus on. And there's a number of different pieces of legislation that I've introduced. I'm reintroducing a bill that this year's AB 1979. It's the California Deforestation Free Procurement Act. And so as a huge procurer, as the fifth largest economy of goods, to ensure any company we contract with does not contribute to tropical deforestation. Again, breaking down those borders and boundaries, recognizing that we all play a role in deforestation happening on the other side of the planet. Similarly, we have legislation regarding phasing out plastics in our supply chain. That's something that can be done right away, frankly. And we do get resistance from a lot of the companies that find the cheaper alternative to use plastics. And I think that's where there's an opportunity, especially for the leadership that ALF provides in the corporate world, in the government sector, to really find the greater common good in terms of advancing these critical needs, like getting the plastics out of our waste stream. I have a bill on pocket forests to create these kind of biodiverse urban forests around our communities throughout California. It hasn't been done before, not from a policy perspective in our country. And so we're trying to really push to bring, especially in communities that don't have a lot of foliage, a lot of trees. We also have a bill to ban fluorescent bulbs. That's something, again, we can do that in the immediate, in the short term, and it has cumulative effect. I passed a bill a couple of years ago to phase out shampoo bottles, the plastic ones. So those are going to be phased out as well. It seems like a little thing, but in California alone, 500 million of those go into hotel rooms every year, and they're not recycled. Like, they talk about low-hanging fruit that are right, it's right in front of us. We sometimes, rightfully so, focus on the sun and solar, and we focus on wind energy. But the reality is there's so much we can do much more quickly and effectively. And of course, with Megan here, the work that we've done on Coyote Valley and other open spaces, right? I think that's been a long journey, but it's critical, not just for the short term, but the long-term sentiment of preserving our land and water. And I was able to introduce AB 3030 to protect 30% of our land and water by the year 2030. And it's something that the governor is going forward with, and even President Biden now has a policy working with our Department of Interior, Secretary, and others. And so there's a lot going on because there's a lot of work to do because we haven't done enough. And that's just some of the things I'm doing. I have wonderful colleagues also working on a number of different things. But I will tell you, for example, the plastics bill, we've been working on it for years. It gets stalled because a lot of folks, a lot of the stakeholders, a lot of the corporate folks that are making money off of either making plastics or reduce supply chain costs are fighting it. And so that's where we need responsible corporate leadership, like we just heard from Dave, being vocal and saying, you know what, enough's enough. We have no more time to waste.
Thank you. That's a really good transition into this next question, which is really about what we all can do and the message that we want everyone to take away. And I think it's important for us to answer that question, or you all to answer that question, in the context of something we heard in the keynote around the threshold we've already passed as a society, and the boat that has already been missed around some of the actions that can be taken. So thinking about what we heard from that keynote, and actually, Mateo, I invite you to also answer this question. What do you think is the most important for everyone here today to understand about the need for each of us to take action? How and where is our leadership and support needed? How can we make the most of this collective impact we can have as a community? Who would like to, Mateo, did you have something you'd like to add to that?
Sure. And thank you, Ash. Thank you, Dave. It's really useful to hear what you're saying. I think the honest truth is that we're in a situation where I'm going to speak in generalizations, but I think they're coherent, which is we live in a situation where rules are made by the rulers. And legality is way behind the morality of our times. So if we were going to give an example, I would argue that motions like the rights of Mother Earth, which are actually moving in multiple localities across the country, in places that we'd call conservative, as well as places that we would call progressive, folks that live in fracking communities and others that are saying, actually, the rights of our waterway, the rights of the land we live on, supersede any other rights. It doesn't matter if a corporation was granted X or Y or Z capacities to do A, B, and C on this land. If it's polluting our water, the rights of the waterways supersede the rights of a corporation. At a policy level, we need to be thinking that way. I'll give an example. The White Earth First Nation in Minnesota is suing the Department of Natural Resources. They put in a suit last August. And interestingly, it's on behalf of what they call Manumin. We know it as wild rice, because the Line 3 pipeline, similar to the Keystone XL pipeline, is threatening the waterways there. And they're making a case legally saying the rights of Manumin supersede the rights of a fossil fuel company. So that's the edge we need to be exploring at a policy level. But the other conundrum I think that is important to name, and Dave and I spoke about this a bit last time, is if a CEO of a big corporation wakes up tomorrow and says, like, wow, what we're doing is actually killing the planet, I need to course correct. And the plan actually seriously diminishes the profit capacity of that corporation, that individual will get fired. Legally speaking, their fiduciary duty is to make profit for the shareholders. So unless and until we take that question head on, we're kind of dancing at the edges. And I think the indicators we're all agreeing it's too late to be timid. We actually need systems change. So I think that's the honest truth. As I was saying, it's like we're far away from that. Like Democrats are a supermajority in California, and yet we're struggling. But that doesn't mean we don't speak truth to what is actually at play. So thanks for asking. I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Ash or Dave, would you like to add to that question?
I'll respond first to what Mateo said, since he and I talked about it. There is an exception to that quote unquote rule about the CEO, and the exception is that the CEO, at least our CEO, and I think many others, realize that the action that is required is not counter to the profit of the company. In fact, the opposite is often true. Right now, people are noticing which companies are doing the right things and which are not, and they are responding in ways that very much hurt the CEO and the shareholder. And so it is my observation, at least it is true for our company, that we do see a very strong connection between doing the right thing and doing the right thing for the bottom line. In our reports, we talk about how much of our revenue is directly created by doing the right thing. And the corollary of that is that we would risk it if we didn't do the right thing. And that number is just growing aggressively as a percentage of our revenue. And I think our company's expectation that soon enough, all of our revenue will be affected by whether we do enough and whether we are doing the right part of the enough. As far as the most important for everyone here, I agree with much of what Mateo said. I would just give two very practical points. The first is vote with your wallet and encourage everybody else to. Companies notice and we move. And so while it's very practical, I think it's very important. It's also Darwinian. The companies that don't move, if we all vote with our wallets, will not survive very long, and that's as it should be. The second is that if you have power, use it. I see a lot of people, particularly in companies, who are passionate but are not active. And I don't know the profile of everybody here, but wherever you are at a company, I think there's a lot of power in voices speaking up wherever they are. Companies need to hear it. The more companies hear it from within, the more the people that make decisions are going to change.
Yeah, those are great comments from both of you. I think to Mateo's points, it is hard when you're trying to. I had a follow up to my 3030 bill, AB 30, which creates a human right to nature, and has gotten a lot of pushback and resistance just on that language because a lot of folks believe, including folks in some of the departments, that it goes too far in creating this human right to nature. When I first got elected, a week after getting elected back in 2016, I visited Standing Rock, and my first bill was to divest our pension funds from the company building the Dakota Access Pipeline. I couldn't even get that bill through committee because it was going way too far, right? And so I think that the reality is, though, now we are actually having another bill to completely divest our pension funds from all fossil fuel that actually has some momentum. It wouldn't have happened if we didn't start that conversation a few years ago. And so I think, what can we do? Well, we're ALF Senior Fellows. We have so much influence. We have so much power. We have to use it for good and be unapologetic about it. And it does mean it will create uncomfortable conversations. I had a lot of uncomfortable conversations. I've had many of them actually with my colleagues when I push a lot of my bills. And that's a price that you have to pay. I'm sure, with Dave talking about HP and pushing some of these things, other folks in the corporate world may not like it. It's like, wait a second, you guys are going a little too far in this particular direction. You're going to make us look bad, or do you really have to go that far, right? And we have to, unfortunately, create those uncomfortable situations, because if we remain comfortable, we're certainly not going to be doing enough. And the reality is that if those that are with us, that call us their friends or coworkers or colleagues or investors, if they actually care about our not just livelihood, but sustainability, if they care about, the ethic that we bring to our work, then they should respect, how earnest we are in pushing the envelope on some of these issues, particularly in regards to, saving our planet. We're doing it for us.
Thank you so much. And we have one final question, 4 minutes left, and I think we can do it. This is a lightning round of a question. And what's ringing in my mind right now is Mateo's comments around it's too late to be timid, right? And we've heard so much about where we're at currently and how far we still need to go. And in spite of all of that, what gives you hope? How do you mobilize yourself to action in the face of all of these big challenges? And maybe we can start with Mateo.
Wow, yeah. So many manifestations of hope are happening all the time. Ash just gave an example, Standing Rock, the Movement for Black Lives, Occupy. It's flourishing all around us. There's a reason why all original peoples have creation stories that are based around the struggle between fear and hope. There's a reason why fascism is on the rise, because fear is a factor that mobilizes people, but hope does as well. And I take tremendous hope. My kids are brutally honest with me about how they see the future. And they're, I wouldn't want to be a 16-year-old today, but they show up, they make music, they laugh, they care for each other. Our sharing and caring muscles are innate to humanity, but they become atrophied by conditioning. So every time we manifest sharing and caring, I feel hope. And the challenge is for us to institutionalize it, to collectivize it, to not make it about individuals, but to make it about collective agency. And I think the more we do that, the more we invite our peers to see the we and the us instead of the me and the mine, the more hope grows.
Thank you. Dave.
I'll say two things. Firstly, if you're familiar with the Stockdale paradox, which is to maintain an unwavering certainty that you will prevail while confronting the brutal facts of your current reality, I see that. I see that in groups like this, and I see more of it around companies than I've seen at any time in the past. So that gives me hope that we are aware of the brutal reality and confronting that while maintaining an unwavering certainty that we will prevail. And the second thing is that it is, I think, proven through history that change starts with small groups loosely connected with a shared purpose. And I feel very fortunate that HP is in that small group, that there are many others in that group, and that we share a purpose and that we will keep pursuing it until we get there.
Thank you. Assemblymember Kalra.
Thank you. I think, as Dave said, spaces like this give me hope. When I look around and see so many incredible people that I have great relationships with, some that I'm just meeting, but know bring something so important to the table. And looking back, we have accomplished things. We talked about Coyote Valley. We look at, the state has led on a lot of things, phasing out, gas engines or gas vehicles. We're moving on a lot of these things. Maybe not quickly enough, but you can actually see tangible positive changes. And the final thing I say that gives me hope is young people. We look at the Sunrise Movement. When you look at young people that are marching in the streets, that are challenging those of us that are electeds unapologetically, that gives me hope probably more than anything.
Ash, Dave, thank you so much for joining us on this panel. Mateo, thank you for this keynote and for also joining us on this panel. I am taking away so much, and I'm sure everyone else is. I'm very eager to hear what comes out of our dialogues as we transition next. I'd like to now introduce